We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Derek, author and webmaster of Gematrinator.com. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the death of George Herbert Walker Bush, also known as Bush 41, or Papa Bush, as some people call him. This man has been in deteriorating health for quite some time. Notice I didn't label this video murder by numbers. It's not necessarily my belief that these people are getting murdered. We do live in what many call an organic matrix, and people die by the numbers, both in real life and in fiction. And when I say fiction, I often refer to the mainstream media, which creates this false reality based on MKUltra mind control that essentially has this entire nation, a lot of our beliefs, a lot of our thoughts, a lot of our political stances are built entirely around fake issues, or issues that may be real but are spearheaded by fake movements. So we're going to talk a little bit about this today. Before I get into the actual numerology of his death, which does have plenty of interesting things, the one thing I want to point out is that he died the exact same day that there was a major 7.0 magnitude earthquake in the city of Anchorage, Alaska, an earthquake that spurred many, many aftershocks, upwards of 200, according to the media as they're reporting this morning. And, we saw this with the death of Barbara Bush and an emergency plane landing on the same day. So first, let's flash back to the death of Barbara Bush. And on the same date she died, there was an airplane that had to make an emergency landing. For anybody who might be new to this channel and is wondering what all these numbers that they're looking at might be, the 4 base ciphers are what's shown on the screen right here. This ancient practice of Gematria, coding letters into numbers or numbers into letters, this practice dates way back to the Hebrew, Greek, Assyrian, Babylonian cultures. And it turns out this language is very much alive and well in the English alphabet. So on the top left, you see the alphabetic order, English ordinal, each letter numbered 1 through 26 relative to its position on the alphabet. We also have reduction methods, which use the rules of numerology to reduce each double-digit number to a single digit. And both of these methods can also be worked with the reverse alphabetic order. These are complementary ciphers to ordinal and reduction. And when Barbara Bush died, her husband, George Bush, was 93 years and 309 days old. And look at Barbara Bush in Gematria. Her name sums to 93 in the alphabetic order and 39 in reduction. So that was the first really interesting thing that stuck out about it. You also had this Aleister Crowley connection, which we'll get into. Well, I should have been more prepared. I got to find my post that connects Barbara Bush to an emergency airplane landing. Well, that ain't it. Oh, bear with me, guys, just for a second. Let's see. So on that date, there was a Southwest Airlines flight on which a passenger died during an in-flight explosion. And this incident was related to another incident that Southwest Airlines had just days earlier. All right, we'll get into that later. Let's look at the earthquake first with George Bush. So the name George Bush, using the alphabetic order, equals 107. G, the 7th letter, E, the 5th, O, the 15th. You add all these numbers up in his name, you get 107. In the reverse alphabetic order, this is where Z gets the value 1, Y is 2, X is 3, all the way through A is 26. The name George Bush equals 163. The word earthquake has these same two numbers, 107 in the alphabetic order and 163 when reversed. So already, it's pretty interesting that we got a major earthquake in America on the same date that George Bush died. Another significant part of this study of numerology is date durations. Measuring between days, we find many alignments between Gematria and dates on the calendar. So George Bush celebrated his final birthday, his 94th, on the date June 12th, earlier this year. And if you measure from his birth date to the date he died, you get 171 days. This earthquake occurred within 10 miles of downtown Anchorage. Using the reverse alphabetic order, Anchorage equals 171. But there's a little bit more that's far more convincing to show us that there's something very mystical going on about our reality, and perhaps those who are controlling the stage that we're all experiencing day to day. So, Anchorage was first incorporated as a city on November 23rd, 1920. George Bush was born on June 12th of 1924. And what's interesting about this is that you find that Anchorage was incorporated exactly 3 years, 202 days before George Bush was born. This 322 number is very significant to George W. Bush, who was a member of Yale's Skull and Bones Society. And Skull and Bones, this is a real-life secret society out of Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. And on the Skull and Bones emblem, you, of course, have the number 322. Consider that 3 hours and 22 minutes on a clock equates to exactly 202 minutes. Using the reverse alphabetic order, Skull and Bones equals 202. Again, George Bush born 202 days after the 3rd anniversary of Anchorage being incorporated. Now, what about the alphabetic order? You know, we don't like to ignore this cipher too often. I consider it perhaps the most significant in this study. Using the alphabetic order, Skull and Bones equals 149. And check out the coordinates for Anchorage, Alaska. It's situated on the 149th meridian west. Additionally, it's also on the 61st parallel north. And while the secret society is called Skull and Bones, the logo is more accurately a skull and crossbones. And to show that this is significant, skull and crossbones equals 223, the reverse of 322. But in reduction, it equals 61. And again, Anchorage, Alaska is situated on the 61st parallel. So how could this all be? You know, this is, it seems like too much for coincidence. And now I'm going to go back and continue to look for my other post here. Maybe I should just hit the archives. Again, I usually come a little more prepared for these live streams, but not this time. So what was so interesting about this is the name of the woman who died on the Southwest flight, I believe, had matching gematria with Barbara Bush. Man, where was this? Starting to wonder if I made a post on this particular incident at all. I mean, I obviously have a post on Southwest, but I don't know if I had a post comparing the two. Sorry about that, guys. We'll skip that for now and just jump into the numerology of George Bush's death in relation to the rest of his family. And when we're looking at numbers like this, you know, again, be cautioned. it feels like no matter who dies in real life or whatever, we all do die by the numbers. And hey, this man could have really been in deteriorating health. He could have really died on this date naturally. And I say this because when we decode our own deaths in our own families, we find similar alignments. However, if there's ever a candidate for murder by numbers, it would be a United States president. So let's begin with the date that this man died, November 30th. Notice how using the alphabetic order, November equals 94. And in the reduction method, November 30th equals 94. And that's the age at which George W. Bush, or H.W. Bush, died at the age at 94. November 30th had full numerology of 79, 11 plus 30 plus 20 plus 18. On Gematrinator.com, if you click on the numbers, you get 3 primary sequence lists when looking at the properties of a number. Perhaps the most significant is primes. 79 is a prime number. It's the 22nd prime. So if you click on the number 22, you get another host of connections. And here we find that the 22nd triangular number, if you add every number 1 through 22, you get 253. Using the standard alphabetic order, George Herbert Walker Bush, his full name, equaling 253. Now, as I've been talking about lately on my channel, it seems as if the ordinal gematria of someone's full name ties into dates on the calendar. And this absolutely seems to be the case here with George Bush as well. So the number 253, we can convert this into a date. 25/3 as March 25th is written in most parts of the world. And that would be the date written 325 here in America. Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, 325. It's the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry headquartered in Washington, D.C., that's technically running our federal government. But what's so interesting about this is that if you measure from the date, March 25th, to the date he died, you get 16 weeks and 3 days. And not only does George Bush's full name equal 1630 in English extended, this cipher on the left side of your screen, structured more closely to ancient Hebrew Gematria and Greek isopsephy, 1 through 9, 10 through 90, 100 through 900. And this, also a very legitimate method of Gematria, we get 1630 in this method. But if you just look at his common name, George Bush, you also get 163 in reverse. So once again, we see another alignment between the date that someone died and the date that's connected to that person's ordinal gematria. 163 also, by the way, that's the 38th prime number. And 38, this is a number that's connected with death, murder, killing. All of these words have base gematria of 38. So here's something else that's really interesting about the date he died. November 30th, 2018 had a life lesson number of 52. This is where we take the date plus the month plus the individual digits of the year. This sums to 52. Now, when I started this live stream, I played this clip.
Opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be.
Well, that's kind of a creepy thing, right? And we will be.
We have a real chance at this new world order.
Okay, so this guy was commonly known as the New World Order president, and I don't know for sure if it was this speech or a speech that he gave in front of Congress, but one of them was on September 11th of 1991. And of course, the September 11th attacks 10 years later were a catalyst for ushering in this New World Order so far. A New World Order which still can be stopped. The abbreviation for New World Order is NWO. And in the alphabetic order, NWO equals 52. But 52 is also a number that complements 47, which we talk about being the number of foundation and super significant to this whole language. Notice how the word government equals 52 in reduction. White House, 52. That's the home of the president, which sums to 52 in the reverse reduction method. The house in which he exercises his authority, which equals 52. The cabal also summing to 52 in the alphabetic order. And when Barbara Bush died, when I kicked this video off, I mentioned how, she has this strange connection to Aleister Crowley. A lot of people believe that she is Aleister's daughter, and I would not debate any of these people. Not only do they look very much alike, but again, they're numerically connected. When Barbara Bush died, Aleister Crowley would have been exactly 52,052 days old. And to top this off, Barbara Bush died 52 days before her own birthday. By the way, the 52nd prime number is 239. Barbara Bush died 239 days after the Great American Total Solar Eclipse. And we will talk a little bit about the eclipse in relation to George Bush as well as we go along. So her husband also dying on a date with 52 numerology. A little bit more about the number 52. This is found in the Gematria of the word Gematria. This language, built on the mathematics of the circle equals 52. And notice how Gematria and the circle also has the same value in both Jewish and English extended Gematria, 233 and 353. These concepts, they're closely related. And when we're talking about circles, there's also this number 50 that's significant. And there's a couple reasons. First of all, the word circle in the alphabetic order equals 50. But there's a letter in the alphabet that is only a circle. And notice how in Jewish Gematria, the O is worth 50. This cipher, structured similarly to English extended, but it's based on the ancient Latin alphabetic order, more modern English characters placed at the end. So the circle has this 50 connection, and the name Bush equals 50 in the alphabetic order. Now, when we're talking about circles, it's difficult not to talk about the number 227. And if you're not familiar with this, hit Alt 227 on your keyboard, on a Windows keyboard. This will give you the pi symbol. And this is not a random selection. On a calculator, 22 divided by 7 gives you the first three digits of pi, 3.14. And using the alphabetic order, 22 divided by 7 equals 314. So this 227 is very significant. In fact, there's 360 degrees in a circle. 360 equals 227 ordinal. And if you measure from the death of George Bush's wife, Barbara, on April 17th to the date of his death on November 30th, you find it was exactly 227 days. And this 227 is a very significant number. The Society of Jesus, whose emblem is a circle. Let's just quick pull up the Jesuit order. This is their logo, the circle. Notice how there's 32 rays of the sun emanating from the circle. The word circle equals 32 in reduction. So using Jewish ordinal, when we drop that cipher to an ordinal base, 1 through 27, the Society of Jesus equals 227. But perhaps more interestingly, ancient accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry using reverse reduction equals 227 as well. Another number these two secret societies share is 187. In reduction, ancient accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry sums to 187. Society of Jesus sums to 187 in the reverse alphabetic order. Earlier this year, George Bush was hospitalized due to low blood pressure and fatigue. That was on the date May 27th, as seen here in the CNN article. May 27th was exactly 187 days before he died. 187. This is the homicide code. It's also the number of chapters in the original Pentateuch, the Hebrew Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. 187 days between solstices, 187 days between President Trump and Pope Francis's birthday. Pope Francis is the first non-closeted Jesuit pope, whereas Donald Trump went to Fordham University, a Jesuit school. And there's more ties numerically between Bush and Freemasonry. Let's also look at the number 58. Bush in the reverse order, 58. In reduction, Freemasonry equals 58. In the alphabetic order, Freemasonry equals 139. Now, Freemasonry was founded by the numbers of solar eclipses. And I have a pretty long post on this. You can search for this. I might just go ahead and link this in the beneath the video here. So Freemasonry is obsessed with total solar eclipses. They were founded exactly 112 weeks to the day after a total solar eclipse passed over London. And the first Masonic Lodge was the Grand Premier Lodge of England in London. So that's a lot of what my channel is about, talking about solar eclipses and how significant they are to time and how the dark occult appears to be crafting its rituals around numbers of eclipses. Now, if we measure from last year's Great American Total Solar Eclipse, which to this date is still the most recent total solar eclipse, we find that this man died 1 year, 3 months, and 9 days after that eclipse. Freemasonry, 139. Also worth pointing out that this same duration is also 15 months and 9 days. And remember, it's the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Scottish Rite equals 159 in the reverse alphabetic order. So now let's talk a little bit about how his death relates to that of, members of his immediate family. So we talked a little bit about Barbara Bush and her death earlier. Barbara Bush's birthday was June 8th, written 6/8. If you measure from her birthday to the date of Bush's death, you get 175 days. And this is pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. The name George Herbert Walker Bush in Jewish Gematria sums to 1750. And with numerology, these zeros can be ignored, so this represents the number 175. And when we crack open the Jewish ordinal cipher, we find that New World Order equals 175. So how appropriate, George Herbert Walker Bush, the New World Order president, sharing Gematria in the Jewish cipher. And then he dies 175 days after his wife's birthday. We're also going to talk about the number 43 in relation to George W. Bush. And, a lot of people call him Bush 41 because he was the 41st president. There is definitely some significance to the number 41 with this man's death. For one, he died on November 30th, and 11 plus 30 equals 41. But to me, the number 43 is actually more interesting. Not only was George H.W. Bush the 43rd vice president of the United States, the date he died had alternate numerology of 43. His son, Jeb Bush, was the 43rd governor of Florida, and then his son, George W. Bush, was the 43rd president of the United States. By the way, Florida equals 43. And remember, George Bush Sr. and his son, George W. Bush, were both members of Skull and Bones. And Skull and Bones is a secret society at Yale. Yale equals 43 in the alphabetic order. And I just want to note that if you measure from George Bush's death to the next date written, 4/3, you get 17 weeks and 5 days, like the number 175. So at Yale, like I said, he was a member of Skull and Bones, which has that 322 number on their emblem. And we saw how this tied into the connection between George Bush and Anchorage, Alaska at the beginning of this video. But what's also noteworthy is that November 30th is the date written 322 on the Hebrew calendar. So check this out. Here on the right side of your screen, we're looking at the calendar converter from Gregorian to Hebrew. And see how Friday, November 30th, 2018, prior to sunset, was the 22nd of Kislev. Kislev is the third month on the civil Jewish calendar. So isn't it interesting that this man died on the date 322 on the Hebrew calendar? On the Islamic calendar, the date December 1st is written 322. And I'm not entirely sure how this works. This may apply to sunset. So it could have still been 322 on the Islamic calendar as well. Either way, one of those calendars, he died on the date 322. So we looked at his wife Barbara Bush's birthday. Next, we'll look at George Walker Bush's birthday. Good old GW. He was born on July 6th, 2018. Measuring from July 6th to the date of his father's death is exactly 147 days. Now, we saw how George Herbert Walker Bush equals 1750, dying 175 days after his wife's birthday. But if we take out Herbert and get George Walker Bush, his son's full name, it sums to 1470. And how interesting is that? He died exactly 147 days after his son's birthday. We're also going to mention Jeb Bush. Now, he does have a couple of other sons, Marvin and Neil. These two people are important. One of them headed the security firm that was in charge of security at a couple of the airports involved in the 9/11 attacks, as well as the World Trade Center. But to keep this simple, we're just going to talk about the more public figures. So Jeb Bush, being a former governor of Florida, definitely qualifies. Using the S exception, John Ellis Bush equals 73. And if you measure from the date George Bush Sr. died to Jeb Bush's next birthday, you find it's 73 days. 73, a number of sacrifice in the alphabetic order. Also the phrase ritual sacrifice, 73. But it's also interesting that Jeb Bush's full name, with the nickname included, which is something that I am consistent with, including in their Gematria, the name John Ellis Jeb Bush equals 171. George Bush Sr. died 171 days after his own birthday. And this 171 is significant for another reason. That would be its prime number relationship. Check out how the 171st prime number is 1019. And here you have the digits 119. Remember, it was the 11th of September on which George H.W. Bush made his New World Order comments, and then it was September 11th when we had the worst terror attack in United States history. Also in Jewish Gematria, remember Tisha B'Av, which is the holiday that commemorates the destruction of the two temples. Tisha B'Av equals 9/11. And it just so happens it was the date September 11th, written 9/11 in the United States, on which the two towers in New York City fell. So this is an interesting number, 1019. What about 1109? A similar number, we can also extract 119 from this. 1109 is also a prime number. It's the 186th prime number. The name George H.W. Bush equals 186 in the reverse alphabetic order. I guess I'll go ahead and mention this just to solidify this connection between George Bush and his son Jeb. When we write out the date November 30th, when George Sr. died, we get the number 211 in the alphabetic order. His son Jeb Bush was born on the date February 11th, written 2/11. Now, if you rewind 211 days from George Bush's birthday, you get, or from the date he died, sorry, truth seekers, a lot of tongue twisters today. 211 days before he died was the date May 3rd, written 5/3. The name George Bush equals 53 in reduction. And then if you measure to the next 5/3, it's 154 days. The name John Ellis Bush equals 154. Also found in ritual sacrifice, 154. So, to be honest, I don't know exactly what it is I'm decoding here. It just seems like all you got to do is type in these names and measure to that date, and you get one consistent alignment after another. So the reason I talk about this as often as I have lately is because I hope that people can pick up on this and maybe use it to help predict things. And, I'm not one to make predictions. My predictions are more gray and... Well, let's talk about my predictions. So actually, I did make a post on the November 29th. I was looking at the next couple of days, and I realized that this next couple of days had some significant alignments to the Great American Total Solar Eclipse, both last year and also to the next total solar eclipse, which occurs on July 2nd of next year. And I don't do this very often, but yesterday, or 2 days ago, I made a post predicting a possible major eclipse sacrifice on December 1st. And as it turns out, we instead got a major death on November 30th, just 1 day away. So my predictions, I often do predict dates on which, something big is going to happen, and then we do get a celebrity death. So, for instance, Dolores O'Riordan, she died on a date that I predicted a Masonic sacrifice. Avicii, the DJ, he died on a date I predicted a major eclipse sacrifice. XXXTentacion, same thing. So with this one, I was 1 day off, and whenever you're 1 day off, actually, some of the measurements still do apply when you do or don't include the end date. But I just want to, say it's worth pointing out that I did see something happening in the next couple of days, and it turns out I was just a day away. So that's pretty much it for the numerology on George W. Bush. I really apologize for my fail on Barbara Bush and connecting that to the whole Southwest Airlines thing. Tell you what, guys, I'm going to hang on with the live stream for a little bit longer, and I'm going to go ahead and figure out what I was trying to get at. How about that? So I got my post on Barbara Bush. I'm going to bring up my post on the passenger who died in the Southwest Airlines landing. It's possible we did not get the name of the victim for a couple of days after this. So I'm going to check my April 2018 archive. And thanks to Google for keeping my blog searchable on its search engine. I know it doesn't like me very much. Okay, so here we go. Name of victims from Southwest explosion revealed. And this is... Okay, so here we go, guys. And this is what the media does. Anytime a major celebrity is about to die, they release news stories that are numeric tributes. So the name of the woman who died in the Southwest explosion, this is an explosion that occurred the same day Barbara Bush died. Her name was Jennifer Reardon. She was a Wells Fargo executive. And notice how Jennifer Reardon equals 88, just like Wells Fargo executive, 88. And when you look at the last name Reardon, doesn't that remind you of someone else who died earlier this year? Remember Dolores O'Riordan, the lead singer of the Cranberries, who died in January? Her name equals 88 in the reverse reduction method, and measuring from her death to the date of this news was a span of 3 months and 3 days. Also notice how Jennifer Reardon equals 1,049. This is very interesting because we just talked about how Anchorage, Alaska is on the 149th meridian. And there was an earthquake in Anchorage the same day George Bush died. George Bush, a member of Skull and Bones, which equals 149. So that is pretty interesting right there. In reverse reduction, Jennifer Reardon equals 92. This is the age that Barbara Bush was at when she died, 92 years old. In English extended, Jennifer Reardon equals 529, which is 23 squared. The name Bush summing to 23 using the S exception. So there's definitely a lot more here. But, this Southwest explosion was also related to another Southwest incident from earlier in the year. It was also related to the death of Hal Greer, Philadelphia 76ers basketball player, and this plane wound up landing in the city of Philadelphia. So I hope that wasn't too abstract. Some of my work isn't the most digestible, and I understand this, but I thank everyone for sticking around and, rolling with me anyway, because, regardless of what you think is causing all of this, when I got into this, I was 100% on the conspiracy train that this was all people sitting in a room, coming up with numeric rituals and then executing them. I still think there's an element of that. However, I'm much more willing to accept the fact that perhaps someone like George Bush just naturally died at the age of 94. And, the fact that he died in relation to the gematria of his sons and their birth dates could very much all be organic, so to speak. And just to touch on the organic matrix, I guess, I promised myself that I would talk more about the organic matrix here in recent weeks. Last year, and then again earlier this year, we continued to find a whole bunch of interesting information about the number 1331. And my initial observation about 1331 was this. When you write out the numbers 133 and 331, you get a Jewish gematria value of 1331, which is interesting because when you merge these two numbers together, 133 and 331, you can make the number 1331. So this was my first clue that there was something very significant about this number. Well, thanks to fellow researcher Lambda 115, he's got his own Gematria YouTube channel with a lot of interesting information. He dug into solar eclipse history and found that in the year 1331, because how about this, right? 1331 eclipse equals 1331. There was only one total solar eclipse in that year, and it was on the date November 30th, which equals 1331. And to this date, it's the only eclipse I've found that never crossed a major body of water. This is basically entirely on land. So there's a few more things that are definitely worth looking at, but this number 1331 is significant, and it's tied to November 30th, the only date on the calendar that sums to 1331. Well, so we made these discoveries, and then really strange things started happening in my life on the date November 30th. So I made a post in my organic matrix thread. This is actually one of my first blog posts I ever made. And what it was questioning how strong the organic matrix is, because on the date November 30th last year, a man who used to be my cousin's boyfriend was murdered. And, this situation was really sad. He was in a car accident. He was talking smack to the guy who hit him, and the guy ended up shooting him. And, what really stood out to me about this is that the guy who died, Kurt Kranzler, his initials were KK, 1111. 1331 is 11 times 11 times 11. Not only that, but his name, Kurt Kranzler, equals 1131, and 31 is the 11th prime number. So this was all weird, and, to get really, really weird about this, I had a mysterious ringing at my doorbell like immediately after I got home, and I went and looked and nobody was there. And that was 11 days after this guy died. So to me, this was a sign. There's something really strong going on with this organic matrix. And this year, on November 30th, I had to go to a funeral for the best friend of a girl that I just started going out with. And it just makes me think, here I've been saying all these people are getting murdered by the numbers and everything, intentionally by a gang. And like I said, that probably still is happening to an extent, but we got to realize that this code is built off of something real, something organic. The reason these numbers are so important to these people is because they understand how the Creator operates. And the Creator operates through Gematria. I have no doubt about this. He also works through dates on the calendar. A lot of people talk about synchronicity and what it means. And maybe I'll just do a quick Google search, right? Here's a page right off the bat. Synchronicity and meaningful coincidences. And a lot of people say synchronicity, there are no such things as coincidences. When synchronicity occurs, there is supposed to be meaning behind it, and we're supposed to learn a deeper lesson from it. And I believe 100% this is the case, but not only does this occur, but synchronicity seems to be coded by the numbers. Whatever we're living in, whatever realm, whatever matrix this is. A lot of people also believe in the secret, which is the idea that if you believe something strongly enough and make it part of your core being, that eventually it will manifest, it will come into fruition. And it's hard for me not to believe this as well. I think this is absolutely the case. But when these things do manifest and come into fruition in your lives, they do so by the numbers. It's as if this matrix recognizes what you're thinking, how you're feeling, what your emotions are attuned to, and then gives you an output. And that might mean sending a certain person into your life. That might mean, something on the news happening that's related to what's going on in your current life. It could be anything like that. And this idea that synchronicity is meaningful coincidence is laughed at everywhere in the mainstream media, whether it's a sitcom, a reality show, or whatever. The idea is always, laughed at and mocked. But the truth is that it's actually a window into the reality of our world, and that we all have the power to change reality. And when we say change reality, it doesn't necessarily mean if you believe something or want something to happen that it's going to happen. However, what you can do is increase the probability that something does happen. And just as an example of this, several years ago, it was late November 2014, my cat snuck out when I was taking the garbage out. And on this night, it dipped below zero. It got super, super cold. And I didn't realize my cat was gone until the next day. And at that point, I got really worried, thinking my cat could have died overnight. And I put flyers all over the city, like within a mile radius, probably put 40 or 45 flyers up on various poles and everything. And I took off of work. I was walking around looking for my cat and had no luck for 3.5 days. And I had pretty much given up. And then a neighbor literally right across the street called me and said, "Hey, I got your cat. She's in the garage with a bowl of food and some blankets." And I picked her up. And I just can't help but wonder, did I help somewhat change my reality by putting so much energy, emotion, feeling into that? A guy who, a friend of mine was telling us a story about how he lost his phone on Halloween one day. And, considering where he lost his phone and how busy it was and how many people were there, the idea that he could have found his phone was laughable. I mean, with so many people walking the streets where he was on such a busy day, for him to drop his phone where he did, and it's just a wild story, but he spent 3 or 4 days doing the same thing I did with my cat, scouring every single place that he walked. And a few days later, he got an email from Apple notifying him that his phone suddenly sent a ping. And it turns out the guy who found his phone finally got a charger, and that phone, had just charged up enough to send a ping to tell him that it was lost. And, guys, the more I pay attention, the more I realize this is what's going on. We do have the ability to change reality in our minds. And, like I said, it's not going to be everything you want. Just because you want to go out with a certain girl doesn't mean if you think hard enough that girl will like you. But if you make it a part of your core being and you accept that you need to take the right actions to do so, to get that girl or something, you make it a part of your being, you're going to increase the probability of it. And that doesn't, I don't mean go obsess over some girl or whatever, but I hope you guys know what I'm saying at, I'm not always the most skilled orator. All right, everyone. Thanks for jumping in on the chat, whether you're watching live or archived. I hope you all have a great weekend. This is Derek signing off. Adios.